Wealth and Poverty, part 2 of our sermon summary this week, verses 9 through 11 in James chapter 1. So Danny went through this really quick, and it was a very powerful, to me, picture of wealth versus poverty in the economy of God. And I have obviously I've been a Christian a really long time. I've read the Bible, I've studied the Bible, I've heard these things before, but sometimes, even though we may have heard this before, sometimes it's just a good reminder of something that you haven't really thought about in a long time. And in my particular season of life, wealth is definitely not my issue. And really never has been. I've lived a comfortable life most of my life, but it's never been one of wealth. So I don't necessarily think of these passages so often as wealth versus poverty as far as the economy of God. And so as we were looking at verses 9 through 11, it talks about the lowly, or the poor, will be elevated and the rich will be humbled. And as I'm listening to him talk, I'm just thinking so much about how in the economy of God, that's what we're talking about, in the economy of God. Here on earth, the poor are considered to be less than, for whatever reason, and for a myriad of reasons, and depending on who's the one talking, right? So if you're poor, you're going to be elevated in the economy of God. So many people would go, okay, so I want to be elevated in the economy of God, so I'm going to sell my things, I'm going to become poor, I'm going to give everything away, I'm going to live in poverty so that I can be elevated in the economy of God. That's not exactly what this passage is talking about. It's not saying give everything away to be poor so you can be elevated. Because as a child of God, you have a position in the economy of God, right? And it is equal to the rich man who comes to Christ. But when we're talking about worldly economy, that rich man, he needs to be humbled because he thinks of himself more highly than he ought. He thinks of himself as better than the poor person. He thinks of himself as, like, some people, they think of themselves like kings, like gods, because they have so much. They have wealth, they have power, they have security. And so then when they come into the kingdom of God, they have to reconcile with the idea that in the kingdom of God, we're all the same. Don't think of yourself more highly than the other person. The rich man needs to work alongside the poor person. We're going to worship alongside the poor person. We are no longer to judge or to consider other people less than ourselves, regardless of anything, because we are all children of God. And so in this passage, that's the big equalizing force, that as we look at it from a worldly perspective, the lowly are being elevated and the rich are being humbled, because in the economy of God, we are all on an equal playing field as far as our position and our authority and what gifts God has given us. So I think that is kind of what wrapped it up in a nutshell for me. And just the idea that everything fades, everything here on this earth fades and withers. So the rich man is going to lose everything that he has. I mean, all the wealth, he's not taking that to heaven with him. He's not going to be taking his home or his cars or anything like that with him. And it isn't to say that wealth is bad, but wealth can be something that makes it difficult for us to see people of a lower social status or a lower financial status than us as equal to us in that economy of God, being able to treat them with kindness, respect, love, humility, and all of those things that we are called to do as we look at the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5. It talks about all the things, all the ways that we are supposed to live, whether we are rich or we are poor. And so this passage just kind of brings that home, where the rich really need to, in our worldly way of looking at things, be humbled so that they can be able to live with the poor as equal parts. I hope that makes sense. It made sense to me. And then that kind of helped me with the whole idea that they say that the rich, it's harder for the rich to come to Jesus because of that. And it's harder for a rich man to come to Christ than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, because of all the things that he has and all the power and position and wealth that he's acquired. And in the economy of God, that all goes away because we are all equal. And I love that picture. But even as a middle class citizen, we can often look down on people who are poor. So it isn't just the dichotomy between the rich and the poor and bringing them to the middle. It has nothing to do with bringing to the middle. It has to do with everybody being equal. And even myself, I can be like, oh, well, I mean, look at them. They don't have whatever. Look at their clothes. We could be very judgmental, going back to being judgmental, and very high and mighty and better than. And that's what this passage is about. Our wealth, our status doesn't matter in the economy of God. So you might need to be knocked down a peg or two, and you might need to be brought up a peg or two, because we all have value, equal value in the economy of God. And I hope that brings some comfort to some people and some understanding to that. Again, we're not to necessarily strive to be poor and be poverty, but we are to be generous. So if we have, we should be sharing. We should be helping others who have not. We should be considering what we have, whether we are really wealthy, moderately wealthy, and even so when we're poor, when we have more than others, we should be considering how we can use what God has given us to help other people. That's my big takeaway. The whole thing was a big takeaway from verses 9 through 11 in our sermon this past week. And it was packed full. It was a lot, which is why I broke this into 2 different sermon summaries. And I felt like they were 2 very different messages in my heart and that I need to apply to my life. So I don't know what you're going to do with that. I know that I am going to be hoping to keep that in the forefront of my mind, because I can also often feel like I am less than, and I can often feel like I am better than other people. And this is something that we have to, as Christians, learn how to do and do better, because it is something that gives Christians a bad name, right? I mean, people look at us when we say that we're Christians and they have an expectation that we're going to be these perfect people or do these right things or always be this and that. And I'll tell you, I have a lot of work to do. I often look at circumstances and outward appearances, and that is one of the things that this is basically talking about. Like we can't be doing that. Like, we are all equal in the eyes of the Lord, and we have a responsibility to care for the needy, to share the gospel, to be kind, to be humble, to be generous, to be not to consider the outward appearance, and to do what is right. And these are things that, as we're learning them, we need to tuck them away, not too deep though, where we can draw on them when we get into a circumstance of it and we go, oh, I'm doing it. How do I change? Why do I change that? They really smell. I don't want to be by them, or whatever the case may be. This is not what God calls us to. God calls us to do something better and to be something better. Not better than somebody else, but better than we are. Our competition is with ourselves, not with other people, to be better and to do better, because we need to be listening to God and doing what He calls us to do. And we need to be reading His Word so that we can do what He calls us to do. And we know what He's calling us to do. And just doing that next right thing, being a person of character. And all of this all of these things, all of these sermons, all of the sermon summaries, all of reading the Bible, that is all tools to which to do that by. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening today, and I hope you're going to join me next week for our next sermon summary. Have a good week.